Now you get to the second tier, and some people may be saying, well, how do you not have Chris Culliver in the first tier? Well, part of it is that he's not even guaranteed to start. If they start Pesor on the outside along with Jordan Shipp, well, then that means that Chris Culliver is not going to be starting because they're not going to be playing him in the slot. He's an explosive player on the outside, but doesn't really have the technical route running ability. His route tree isn't nearly as complex as it would need to be if he's going to play in the slot. That's why I think you should see more of Kobe Pesor in the slot, on top of the fact that he's effective. But I mean, the thing is with Chris Culliver too, he only has 7 catches in his career. It feels like he has more based off of what we saw from him last year. And, you know, he had a big performance in the game against NC State where he caught 2 passes for 96 yards. And that provided some hope for what his future could potentially look like. This is another guy that I look at and think he could have a breakout season, but I don't think anything is necessarily guaranteed with him because of the type of player that he is. I'm just hoping that he can live up to that billing that I gave him out of high school, which was a guy that reminded me of De'Ami Brown.
Yeah, I think what you said is correct. So it's 7 career catches?
7 career
but
catches.
I guess it was the magnitude of every time he made a play probably just felt very important. So we probably magnify how many catches he had. You mentioned the game against NC State with 2 catches for over 90 yards. That definitely goes a long way. He's a guy that, you know, we talk about just as much with Jordan Shipp from when I kind of set the scene for this position preview. It's not like there's not a lack of talent or a lack of ability with him. There just has to be production. Like this has to now become seeing is now believing because he is a capable guy. You know, De'Ami Brown's a lofty comparison, but it's not one that I thought when you went that route. I didn't think you were exaggerating. I didn't think you were putting too much of a burden of expectation upon him. I think he was a guy last year, maybe as much as any wide receiver on the roster that's back, that really was held back and hindered from the inconsistency of the quarterback play. Like if Carolina gets consistent quarterback play from, we imagine Gio Lopez is going to be the starter, whether it's Max Johnson or Bryce Baker does emerge, as long as he has the same signal caller in the shotgun every Saturday, I think Chris Culliver stands to maybe benefit from that the most. And I do think, you know, breakout for him is definitely on the table. I just wonder if we're thinking out loud here, what does breakout production look like for him if we're in the camp of Jordan Shipp being, I don't know, 60, 65 catches, north of 800 yards and maybe 8 touchdowns? What does production for a breakout Jordan or Chris Culliver look like?
Think honestly, you know, with the fact that there's a chance he doesn't play or doesn't, you know, start, but doesn't play as many reps as a guy like Jordan Shipp, a guy like Kobe Pesor, I think, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 yards and maybe 4 or 5 touchdowns, just a guy that is able to take the top off of the defense, gives you that explosive threat down the field. Now, I think he can be more of a complete receiver than that on the outside. I think there's elements of that to his game. It just has to be developed. But that's really where he shined. And Carolina needs that deep threat. You go back to last year, that was one of the things that Carolina really lacked. And I get it, man. J.J. Jones tried to be that guy. He tried to turn his game into that. That wasn't J.J. Jones's game. J.J. Jones was a guy that I think was more complete as a receiver, and it showed, but he wasn't that explosive guy on the outside. This is what Chris Culliver can bring to the table. I mean, just go back and watch what this dude did on special teams as a kick returner. The explosion is there. So you want to see that translate not only before the catch, but after the catch as well for him. I think that's where you're hoping he really shows up this year. And I think he's got a chance to do it. I just think that, you know, now with more opportunities there, this will be where he can shine through. For me, it's about consistency from him. He can't be a guy that's there one week, disappears the next week for Carolina, especially if they're going to rely on him, which I think they will. The other guy that I have listed in tier 2 is the guy that I think is probably going to end up being a starter for Carolina this year in the slot, and that is Aziah Johnson, excuse me, from Michigan State. He was a guy last year that at Michigan State, in an offense that really wasn't all that great, passing offense that really struggled. Aiden Childs, if I remember correctly, threw the most interceptions in all of college football last year. But I'll tell you one thing about him that I really like. He was targeted 25 times last year, caught 16 passes for 276 yards and 2 touchdowns, and dropped just 1 pass during that time. So he seems like a reliable receiver. I like some of the shiftiness that he brings to the table, really strong route runner. I think this is another guy that really didn't get a ton of opportunities at his last school, but could succeed here for Carolina. I don't expect him to have a massive season like we talked about with Josh Downs or something like that in the slot. But if he is a starter and he gets starter-like reps, I could see this being a guy that has more success for Carolina in the slot than Nate McCullum did, which is a bar that Carolina has to get over this year with that slot group, because last year it was just non-existent at times.
Yeah, he stands at 6 foot tall, $175. You mentioned 16 catches for over 270 yards. That factors out to 17 yards per reception. If he could do that, but let's say you double the catch total, I think you're getting. That's quality production right there. If you can get anywhere from 35 to 40 catches out of him, and then you get that receiving total, north of 400, maybe pushing 500. I think that'll really do wonders for Carolina's offense as they try to be, I think, very diverse in the passing game. You mentioned the quarterback that he had to endure playing last year. I would argue, and it's not much of an argument, he's walking into a better quarterback position here at Carolina, even though Gio Lopez is making the transition to the power conference level. But I do think, he's a transfer that is going to be a difference maker for Carolina. I think Carolina is counting on him to be a difference maker as well. And you're right, man. Nate McCullum, outside of the Minnesota game where he had like 16 catches and made it felt like every play, it just felt like after that moment, he was just never the same guy. And what was frustrating was because there was so much more potential in his game that Carolina just could not unearth, whether it was because of him, whether it was because of Chip Lindsey. But if they're going to be stubborn and more committed to Kobe Paysour working on the outside and not playing primarily in the slot, you've got to find a guy that can produce for you to get open in the middle of the field. I think Johnson is one of those guys, and I think he'll be one of the newcomers in this wide receiver room that we'll be counting on in a big way for this passing game to be the best and the most explosive as it can be.
Yeah, I think he's more than capable of handling that. I mean, as you mentioned, last year, you look at the numbers that he put up. I mean, to have 17 yards per catch out of the slot, that shows you that there's a level of explosion there. There's a level of big, big plays that he can bring to Carolina's offense. And again, you're looking, this is going to be an offense that we think is definitely going to be a little more methodical. And I think, with him, it would have evened out. If he would have started catching the football a little bit more, I really do feel like it evens itself out. And he probably ends up with a more normal yards per reception. But I do think that he is a guy that does have those explosive traits, especially after the catch. I think he does a really good job of making guys miss in the open field. So that's something that Carolina really needs, because that was something that really seemed to be lacking from their group a year ago, was that ability to stack up the yards after catch. We got so used to it when you had guys like Josh Downs that were there that could create those on just about every catch that he made. Hopefully, Aziah Johnson is a guy that is able to do that for Carolina this year.